Welcome to Walk Worthy. I'm Erin.
And I'm Lindsay, and this month we're going to be talking about rest. So I think that in our culture, we are not a culture that rests. We run, we do, and there's not a lot of time. Sure, people go on vacation, things like that,
Right.
but even in that,
But you live for that moment.
yeah, exactly. Like maybe you go on
Maybe,
vacation.
yeah.
You know, I know there are people that, well, in whatever world, but my husband knows that have canceled all their vacations for summer because like, well, there's too much to do and I can't go on vacation. So that is the culture that we live in. And so talking about rest is very countercultural to that. And we have to work to rest,
Yes,
honestly.
yeah. Yep.
So I guess we need to talk about kind of why do you think we don't rest? And then we can kind of talk about what it's supposed to look like and what it is.
Sure.
But I think anybody watching can relate to the fact that like, yeah, like it's hard for me to rest. It doesn't come naturally to us. We're not prone to it. So why do you think that that is?
Well, I think our culture is it's a very busy, very distracted culture that we live in. And it seems the message is more is better. So where even if you look at how people parent now versus, when I was a kid, there was a lot of running around the neighborhood and building forts. Now it seems like kids are very scheduled. They're going from music lesson to tutoring class to swim lessons and let's play soccer and basketball and baseball all at the same time and figure out how to make it work, And as much as there are benefits to maybe some things that kids are involved in, I think this becomes a culture that we're modeling to our children and even to ourselves. We're trying to do everything. I think the message is you can have it all, but the reality is that you can't. Your life
and that's okay.
And it's okay. Yeah, and it's good, actually.
You're not failing. You're not losing.
Right. Yeah, so to try to, I think, especially for women, too, you can feel like you need to work a full-time job. You need to keep your house like Martha Stewart and make perfect meals and then also volunteer at church and do all these things. And if you can't, you're somehow failing.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
More's better.
Right. And two, also, I think a lot of times we can fall into a trap of thinking like we have to do everything, almost like a pride thing. Like, well, nobody else can do it, so I've got to do it.
Yeah.
Or
they won't do it right.
Exactly, for sure. Or even we can find our worth in that. Like, I'm not good enough if I can't do all these things. Like you said, the more is better. Like, I think that is definitely something as women that can be, you think you have to do it all and everything has to be perfect. And so we can find our worth in that instead of in Christ, which is obviously where we're supposed to find it.
Well, and sometimes even chasing the approval, the peer pressure of, all the other women are doing this, or the illusion. Sometimes we think we take a look at somebody's life from the outside and we think we have it figured out what all they're involved in, what all they're doing. And so then we feel the pressure of having to measure up to that, or we gain the approval of man or the praise of man somehow by gathering accolades because we did so many things.
I know I've done that before when I've looked at other people and been like, oh my gosh, like they do this and they do this. They've got all these kids. Like, I don't even have any kids and I don't feel like I'm not doing as much as they are. Like, well, geez, Lindsay, like, what are you doing with your life?
Together.
I know. Like, you've got more hours in the day. Like, what are you doing? And I've done that before and you kind of had to like bring myself back to earth. Like, okay, that's not what this is about. Like, what did God call you to? And, all of that. So any other reasons you think? What is in the soul of man that makes us not, like, refuse to rest almost?
I don't know. I mean, maybe we think we're lazy, or we just think we're not entitled to rest for some reason. I don't know. I mean, there are probably different reasons for different people, but it's easy to react and act upon things, but the bigger question is what is in the heart that's driving the action, and trying to figure that out for your individual self. What's the reason for me that I feel like I have to be so busy all the time?
Right. Yeah. Busyness and things like that. Like maybe sometimes people just like, they don't want to, the Bible talks about being still. They don't want to be still. They don't want to have to deal with the thoughts in their head or, the emotions, or maybe there's something they need to work through with the Lord. And if I stay busy, if I do all these things, then I don't have to do that.
I don't have to think about it.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And that can be true even of marital problems or conflict with children or friends. Sometimes we are in a place of pain or conflict and we don't really want to deal with it. So if we just stay busy enough, we don't really have to think about it. Yeah. So it's a means to avoid rather than to deal with.
Yeah. Or it's probably a combination of all the things we mentioned
could be
in each of us, because we're a mess.
Yes, this is true.
But like really searching in your own heart, like what is it for me that I struggle to rest? I think it would be beneficial to talk about some like examples of rest in the Bible and what like kind of the examples that are laid out for us of people in the Bible that rest. So obviously like the first example would be at creation. God himself created for 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And that he was kind of setting us up with that from the beginning.
Right. He didn't obviously need the rest.
Right. Like he was okay.
He's fine. But as a pattern for us, right, as an example that he himself deliberately took the time to rest.
And then obviously if we like continue to walk through the Old Testament, we come about to see the Israelites and the 10 Commandments, and they were told to keep the Sabbath day holy. Just continuing that.
I was reading about the Sabbath, and it was interesting because it's one of the commandments, but it's not one that you really study out typically that much. You're like, the Sabbath, we should rest, but I'm so busy.
But not me.
But not me. But it, the penalty for breaking the Sabbath, for profaning the Sabbath, was stoning to death.
Yeah, wow.
Like it was serious.
Yeah,
God was
equal
serious
with all the rest of the commandments. Right. Yeah.
It's not, I think it's almost a lesser commandment. Obviously you shouldn't commit adultery. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't have graven images, but the Sabbath is like, the Sabbath. Yeah, it's in there, it's one of the lesser ones but no, I mean, you were stoned if you did not keep the Sabbath. It was a big deal. And they had so much so that even when you read about it, God commanded that every 7 years would be a Sabbath year for the crops. Like even the land rested every 7 years. And then every 50th year, they had this big Jubilee rest where everything was freed and returned. But can you imagine it was very agricultural. They, relied on those crops and things. So every 7th year, you had to let your field lay dormant as the Lord, and trust the Lord to provide. And it said that he would bless the harvest in the 6th year to carry you through the 7th year through the harvest of that 8th year. Yeah, wow. But you let it just sit. Your livelihood, everything would just sit for a full year, and you let the whole land rest.
That would drive some people insane. Like, I gotta go out there. I gotta work.
There are weeds.
Yeah, exactly. Just like stress level rising. But that's what they were commanded to do.
Yes. And purpose in it, though, I believe that it trained them, it forced them to remember who their provision came from and that the Lord was watching over them. And it kind of realigned their hearts through a physical means.
Yeah. And that's such a picture to us of what rest actually does for us. Because, and when we talk about rest, we're not just talking about taking a nap or like, I have the day off work, I'm going to sit around and watch TV. Like those things can be restful.
Yes.
But that's not the only thing we're talking about. We're talking about actual like spiritual rest along with physical rest. And so I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about what spiritual rest is.
Sure.
And how we would define that. Well, part of that is, I guess I'll read this verse because this is what Jesus is talking about. In Matthew 11, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus talks about we will find rest for our souls. That's like a spiritual rest. So what would be a way we could kind of like define that for people? It's kind of hard to like describe. When you experience it, like, like, wow, I am rested and refreshed in the Lord. But I guess how could we kind of describe that to somebody that maybe has never had spiritual rest in their whole life?
Right. Well, that verse in Psalms that says, "Be still and know that I am God." To me, that is a picture of rest, that we take the time to quiet our souls before the Lord, to cast our cares upon him, to cast our anxieties and those things that trouble us that we maybe even are trying to solve on our own. Maybe part of our work is trying to meet a financial need or fix a health problem or care for a loved one. And we take the time to present those things before the Lord and allow him to fill our soul. Psalm 23 talks about him leading us beside quiet waters and restoring our souls, because we need that, because we get tired and we get worn out. And to be able to rest in the Lord requires, I think, space and time and quietness before him.
And it's not always like comfortable initially,
Sure.
especially if it's not something that you practice regularly. It might be difficult, but it's worth it when you really just allow God to refresh your soul and speak to you and restore, just give you that rest that he talks about, that he offers, that he promises.
Yes.
It is for everybody. You're not the exception to the rule. Like, I
Right.
can never rest.
Right.
I'm too busy. I have all these things to do. There's a story of Elijah in First Kings, and he has just, I think he had just like outran Jezebel or something in a chariot, I don't know, superhuman speed from the Lord. And then he has a time where he's like laying under this juniper tree, and this angel comes and feeds him, and then he goes off that strength for 40 days. Well, then he gets all into like this dramatics, like, oh, we should just read it, because it is actually like, oh wow, this could be me reading this, saying this, because I'm so dramatic sometimes. But
that's good.
what did he say? Oh, Elijah says, so God asks him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah says, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So Elijah is just kind of like, everybody else is gone. I'm the only one being faithful to you. I'm the only one working. And just like, it's kind of, I mean, we can be the exact same way, right?
Yep.
Where we think like, well, I can't rest because I have this, and this that has to be done. And if I don't do it, nobody will do it. My kids will be starving. Like all these things.
Yeah.
But there are seasons where maybe rest isn't as easy, and that's okay. I'm sure you have 5 children.
Yep.
Now they're getting a little bit older.
Yes.
But they weren't all older
Yeah.
at the time. And so I'm sure you had years where it was like, rest, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
For real.
So what would you say to maybe somebody who's in that season?
You know, it's hard when kids are little. I mean, oh boy, my youngest was up every 2 hours for like 6 months, you know, so you're just sort of a walking zombie, which impacts your whole life. It impacts your judgment, I swear, your reason. You're a little bit crazy. You're a little edgy. You're just like, so
like nobody listened to anything I'm saying because
know, like,
it's not me.
Take everything with a grain of salt. I don't know if I can fully be trusted to say what is true.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like my dream vacation would just be a dark hotel room by myself where I just could sleep. You know? Like, I don't want anybody there. I don't need to talk to anybody. I don't even need a TV. I just want to go to bed. And that's difficult because there are seasons sometimes where, again, maybe you're caring for a loved one, or, you know, for whatever reason, you're up in the night with a struggling child, or whatever it might be. Sometimes life happens to you despite your best effort to rest and create spaces and time. You know, sometimes life is just life, and it throws curveballs at us sometimes. You still need to carve out time to be with the Lord. If you can't physically rest, I mean, I love what it says in Isaiah about, I guess I'll just read it since the Bible's good. It talks about, he gives strength to weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. So there are real seasons when we are weary and we are tired and we lack might, but it says that he has promised to increase his power, to increase our power. But if we don't take the time to wait on the Lord, if we don't take the time to at least renew our souls, maybe our physical bodies are literally wasting away because we're so tired, but we are guaranteed and we are promised that he will renew our strength, that he will somehow enable us to do what we're called to do, that he will give us the grace for that the place that we are weak and the place that we falter and we fall, that he has promised to make up that difference with his grace. But if we don't rely on him, we don't really tap into that grace, and then we don't get the benefit of the spiritual rest that then will fuel the strength for what we need to do for that day.
We were talking before about thinking like depending on ourselves, like you were just saying, like we have to depend on the Lord, we have to trust the Lord, and that's, I think, probably at the very root of what rest is. There's a verse in Psalm 127, and it says, unless the Lord builds a house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is not in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. And sometimes we, I think, are trusting in ourselves. Like in this verse, it's talking about these people are building the house. They're not trusting the Lord to build the house. So everything they're doing is vanity.
Yeah.
Like, you're doing this for you. You're doing this for your glory. if God didn't ask you to do it, if you're running yourself ragged in the name of serving the Lord,
Right.
Or whatever it is,
Right.
like,
Or being super mom or getting an award at work or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What is the reason that we're doing that?
exactly. Like, if it's not like, that's for you, that's not for God. That's not, you have to do it. What did God call you to? Did God call you to the things that you're actually doing? Or are you just, well, everybody else is doing it and God called her to this, so like I'm probably supposed to be doing it too, you know?
Right.
That's kind of where I was getting in my head with like looking at other people, like, well, she's serving the Lord and she's doing all these things, so I'm probably not doing enough because I want to serve the Lord.
Right.
But what did God call you to? And if it's for your own pride, your own ability to feel like, I don't know, you're good enough, none of that is for the Lord, and it's in vain.
Yep.
So at the root of rest is really, I think, trusting the Lord, which is kind of at the root of everything we do. It's just another thing added to the list.
We're just not very good at it, I guess.
We're not. We're really bad at it. We just try to do things on our own. So we've talked a little bit about some of the things that rest entails, time with the Lord, but there are other things that it can be. Rest isn't necessarily just like I have to read my Bible and be praying.
Yeah.
There are other things that entail. So what is that?
Well, I do want to say, as you talked about laboring, if we are going to rest, that doesn't imply that we are actually doing some work.
Yes.
So, some people are really good at me time, their rest or whatever, but you're not really doing anything.
Or their self-care.
Or their self-care. Yeah. But if you look at the whole of their life, you're not really sacrificing. You're not really serving,
What are you resting from?
What are you resting from? So we are called to some kind of industrial work and labor and diligence and serving of the Lord and pursuing his calling, all those things. So I guess we're more today specifically talking to those people that maybe lean more on the work side than those that lean more on the rest side.
Yes. This is not like an excuse like, well, the ladies say I need to
Yes.
rest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quit everything I've ever done and call the church and tell them I can't serve anymore.
Right. So I'm sorry, you asked me a question though.
What more of what rest can look like?
Well, it has to be deliberate. It really does, because if you're waiting for rest to just happen to you, it never will, and there's always something more to be done. And 5 kids has taught me that, because there would be moments that I would plan. I'm going to sit down after the dishes are done, after I have, picked up this room, after, whatever. But then what would happen is my kids would be playing really nicely for a minute, and I would hurry up and do the dishes, and I would do the cleaning up, and I would do the things, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to sit down. And inevitably I would sit down and it would be like, mom. And I'm like, I didn't get my minute, to sit down. And I realized that sometimes you have to take the moment as it's given, even with the to-do list looming.
Yes.
Because there's always a to-do list. There are always more things I could do. There's always another load of laundry. There's always an errand to be run. There's always an email to be responded to, or a child to, be helped, or a room to clean or something. So I have to, when I see the window of rest, grab it. And let everything else lay for a minute, because that stuff will keep. And I think we need to deliberately carve out long spaces of rest. An hour sometimes is not enough. If you're really busy, 2 hours isn't going to cut it. For us, ministry is, you're in ministry. It's heavy. It's hard. You carry really heavy burdens. It's wearisome. It's difficult sometimes. And you have to have rest, or you'll burn out. And for us, Monday is that day. And I used to, especially when the kids were younger, it's hard to get anything done, because as you're doing something, they're undoing something else. And so I would try to do projects, because Wes would be home. Like, okay, today I can tackle this big project. But I found myself getting so exhausted all the time. And Wes was just better at taking swaths of that day to rest. And I was just still working. And I realized, not that I won't do anything on a Monday, but it's a more casual, I might pull a few weeds because I like to do that. Or if I want to paint something because I enjoy doing that, but really trying to make the whole day an unplanned day where we don't have dinners or lunches or appointments. We really try to guard that day as just an open day to let's see what happens, because that is our day of rest. Now, sometimes it gets hijacked by emergency.
Yeah, who knows?
But it's the goal, right? And it helps us be able to do the work that we're supposed to do because we have set aside and protected that day. And it's hard because there are a lot of demands, and there are still good things that people sometimes will say, oh, come and do this. It's on a Monday. And you're kind of like,
yeah, just because you're trying to protect it, because if you don't, it'll get away from you so fast.
It does. And I can't, it's hard for us to do all the rest of the work if we don't take a deliberate day of rest. And sometimes that's difficult for people to understand, and sometimes that's disappointing to people. But that is part of what me being faithful to the Lord looks like, so that I can do what he's called me to do.
Well, and you've seen what it's like when you don't do that.
Yes.
And you've seen, like, this is really important, like you said, in order for you to be faithful to the Lord. But it is so different from what most people, how they live their lives. And so it is going to sometimes get a little pushback, like, well, why? Like,
right. And people don't understand it. So if even, it's hard to say, this is our family day. People kind of are like, well, set it aside for this one thing. Like, but I could set it aside for this one thing every single week. Every week. So it just has to be, we have to set aside the time to rest, to plan it. And it's not, people think of like, oh, well, I have Saturdays off. Okay. But if you're at 3 soccer games, or you're hosting a brunch, or you're still working, you're still doing things. It's not just time sitting. We try to log some time just sitting on the porch, just maybe I drink tea, he'll drink coffee, and just sit, And I think it's a healthy thing. You end up talking to each other. Sometimes we just sit there quiet, and there's space in your head to think, because we just need time, unscheduled, unhurried, without somewhere we have to be, to rest.
Right. And everybody's life is different. So the challenge is to find in your life where that space can be.
Right.
And what you're going to do to protect it, and see what God will do in it. If you've never had a time like that in your life, set it aside, make that decision for you, for your household even, and just see what God might use it for, because he does give it to us for a purpose.
Yes.
And he will use it. Let me think. I got distracted. I was really into that conversation. So we've talked about the rest that Jesus offers. We've talked about, and I think part of that too, just to touch on that, the rest that comes from just knowing Jesus and salvation. The world is hopeless. The world is restless because they don't have the Lord, and they don't have Jesus. And so just the initial rest that comes to a soul when they come to know Jesus is just kind of a beautiful thing. And then
peace. Yes.
Yeah. And as it just carries out throughout the rest of the relationship with the Lord, it gets even better. But just even that initial, like, it's taken care of, and Jesus has saved me, and I don't have to cease striving. There's another version of Be Still and Know that says cease striving, and I really love that picture. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this, but are there any other ways where we can pursue rest even when it's not convenient? We've touched on it a little bit, but maybe just, one more thing. Maybe someone is in really extreme circumstances, and like we said, it has to be deliberate. But is there any other, things we want to say about that?
Yeah. Again, you cannot neglect, the Bible tells us that he will keep in perfect peace those that trust in him, and there are situations beyond our control that attack our peace, that cause anxiety, that rob our rest, even our physical rest. There are situations and circumstances where there are times where you just lay in bed awake at night, where you should be sleeping, you need the rest, you're tired, but you're not at rest, you're not at peace because of whatever's going on. But the Bible tells us that he will keep us in perfect peace. But it's up to us to pursue that. So like you said, at salvation, we are given peace of soul. We are made at peace with the Lord. But there are many cares, many distractions, many worries that rob us of that. And if we allow that to happen, we are robbed of rest. Our souls are not at peace. So trying in the midst of that, even if sometimes physical rest is fleeting, we should still be at peace. The Bible talks about us having undisturbed spirits, that we have a quiet spirit because we're at peace. And that is part of having been with the Lord. So even in those times where you might feel like you're not able to physically rest, we should still be able to be prayerful. We should still be able to spend time with the Lord. And sometimes it might just be a quick verse. There might not be time for an intensive Bible study where I'm going through 10 verses and I'm really digging in here. But what is the one verse that is carrying me through today? And that is where, in times where you're not in major crisis, that's where you should be studying your Bible. And maybe you have a catalog of note cards where you have a bunch of verses that you've really loved. And then in the crisis times, you can go back and flip through and be like, oh, this is the one.
Yeah.
And you don't have the time to really study, but it's in there somewhere because you've done the work. And so now you can lean back on it and you have it. But to try to still pursue rest, because it is dangerous to us if we don't.
Yeah.
It's dangerous to us, to our physical health, to our emotional health.
Right. And
we desperately need it. And the Lord knows that we do.
Yeah. Well, I hope that this was helpful to you today. Maybe you have been running around like crazy and you just need to be reminded to rest. I would challenge you to maybe take some of the things that we said today, to look at your own life, set aside a time where you can rest and just see what God will do with it, and the difference that there can be in your life when you are at perfect peace because your mind is set on Him and you have had that time in His presence and with Him. And so we challenge you to do that today. We will see you next time, but until then, walk worthy.